I'm not telling this because I want attention. I'm telling it because there are parts of my memory that don't belong to me anymore. And if I don't put them somewhere outside my head, I think they'll finish rewriting what's left. The thing that gets me is how ordinary it was at the start. Not ordinary like safe, ordinary like paperwork, like grant proposals and gear lists, and the kind of logistical nonsense you do to convince yourself nature is manageable. I went in for a survey contract. A private conservation group had purchased a stretch of rainforest that sat between two already protected areas. Their pitch was simple: confirm the boundaries, document any poaching trails, and gather baseline biodiversity audio. If they could prove it was a corridor for certain species, they could argue for government protection. They hired me because I'd done remote audio mapping before. I'm not a hero. I'm the guy who puts microphones on trees and comes back with hard drives full of noise. My plan was 4 days in. 2 to set the recorders, 2 to retrieve them. I had a local guide lined up for the first day only. After that, I'd be within the safe buffer zone that was supposedly crisscrossed with ranger trails. It was manageable on paper. The first sign something was wrong happened within the first hour, and I dismissed it the way you dismiss a wrong note in a song you've heard your whole life. It sounded like an echo, but the canopy doesn't echo like that. The drop-off was a small clearing hacked out years ago by a logging outfit. Their presence was gone now, but the land still remembered. Stumps like old wounds, rusted cable half swallowed by vines, a dented fuel drum with holes through it where someone had used it as target practice. My guide's name was Polo. He was lean and quiet and moved like the forest belonged to him. He didn't look at things for long. He didn't waste attention. He helped me shoulder my pack and pointed out the direction of a faint trail. "Stay online," he said in English that felt practiced. "When you hear river, you are close to marker. Don't go deep if weather turns." "I won't," I said, "because that's what you say." He looked at my gear and frowned slightly. "You record voices?" "Animals," I corrected. He made a small sound in his throat, not a laugh, more like a private disagreement, and tapped the side of his own head. "Forest record you," he said. "You don't know." That was the first line I should have taken seriously. I didn't. We walked for 40 minutes. The jungle closed around us. The light became green and thick, like it had weight. Sweat started instantly. The air wasn't hot so much as present. It filled every space in your lungs and refused to leave. At the first creek crossing, I pulled out my phone to mark coordinates. No signal, obviously. I wasn't surprised. I used offline maps. The little blue dot drifted. Not far, a few meters. Then it snapped back. Then it drifted again. "GPS jitter," I muttered. Polo watched my screen and said nothing. When we reached the first planned recorder site, I chose a tree that was stable and thick. I strapped the audio unit about chest height, checked the mic direction, tested the gain. Then I spoke into it, just to set a baseline. Site 1, 10:43. Humidity. My voice came back a half-second later. Not through the recorder, not through speakers, through the forest. It wasn't loud. It was like a canyon. It was the way a room sometimes repeats you when you speak at the wrong angle. I froze with my hand still on the unit. Polo stopped moving. We both listened. The jungle was full of sound, but there was a pocket of wrongness in it. A space where my words should have been swallowed but weren't. The delayed repeat happened again, softer, like someone testing it. Humidity approximately 90%. Half a second later, 90%. I stared into the foliage and saw nothing. Polo's face went tight. "Don't talk," he said, and his voice was low and serious enough that I obeyed without thinking. We stood there for a full minute, letting the jungle resume. Insects, birds, dripping water. The constant wet breath of the place. Polo stepped closer to the recorder and touched the strap as if checking it was secured. But his eyes were on the dark beneath the ferns. Then he motioned for me to follow. He didn't explain. I didn't ask. I told myself it was acoustics, a hollow trunk, a weird angle, a trick of humidity. That's what you do when the world offers you something you can't categorize. You file it under coincidence and move on. 40 minutes later, it happened again. This time I wasn't speaking. I cleared my throat. The sound came back to me from somewhere behind my left shoulder, faint but exact. Polo didn't look back. He just raised a hand and kept walking faster. When we reached the second site, he stopped. "No more," he said. "What?" He pointed at the line of trees ahead like they were a border. "I go back. You go. But no talk, not answer. You hear your name, you keep your mouth closed." He wouldn't look me in the eye as he said it. I swallowed and forced a smile I didn't feel. It just echoes. He shook his head once. "No, echo is dead thing. This is..." He searched for the words and failed. "This is listening." He turned and walked away down the trail without another word. I watched him disappear into the green. Then I adjusted my pack, checked my map, and told myself I was alone now. There's a rhythm that you fall into when you're alone in a dense forest. Step, pause, listen, step again, check your bearings, keep moving. The path wasn't really a path, more like a series of depressions and broken stems where humans had moved enough times to leave a suggestion. I moved carefully, because the jungle punishes arrogance. I saw signs of life everywhere. Bright frogs, tiny and toxic. A snake draped over a branch like a living rope. Lines of ants carrying leaf fragments bigger than their bodies. The canopy hid the sun. Direction became a concept rather than a thing you could confirm. I used the compass anyway, more for comfort than accuracy. At around midday, I found a fallen log and stepped over it. A thorn snagged my calf. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a spike trap. It was the kind of minor injury you collect without thinking. But it cut deeper than it should have. I hissed, crouched, and rolled up my pant leg. A thin line of blood welled immediately, bright against my skin. As I cleared it with an alcohol wipe, I noticed something at the base of the log. Black mushrooms. Not the usual pale shelf fungus. These were glossy and dark, like they'd been polished with oil. Their caps were small, clustered tight. The gills were almost liquid-looking. I leaned closer, not because I'm reckless, but because curiosity is my job. The air around them felt cooler. When my breath touched them, a faint puff of dust rose. Spore cloud. I'd seen it before. I backed away instinctively, but it was too late. The dust had already settled on my hands, and the cut on my leg was still open. I wiped it with a damp cloth. The black residue smeared like soot. For a moment, I thought I saw the smear move. Not crawl, but shift. like ink dispersing in water. I blinked. It stayed still. "Okay," I said out loud, because talking to yourself is normal when you're alone. Half a second later, from somewhere behind me, "Okay." My blood went cold. It wasn't my own voice exactly. It was close enough to be wrong, like someone had copied it, but didn't understand the tiny details that made a person sound like themselves. I spun in a slow circle. Green, leaves, vines, nothing human. The jungle noise continued, like it hadn't noticed. I stood perfectly still, listening hard enough that my ears hurt. Then, from deeper in the brush, my voice again, softer. "Okay." I didn't answer. I remembered Paulo's warning. I forced myself to breathe. Then I moved on. Faster now, more rigid, eyes darting to every shadow. For the rest of the day, I didn't speak at all. But the forest did. Not in words, in patterns. Every time I stopped, the insect noise dipped slightly, like a room quieting when someone walks in. Then it resumed. Every time I stepped over a root, something stepped too, half a beat behind me. Not loud enough to place, not consistent enough to prove, just enough to keep my shoulders tight. By late afternoon, I reached the river Paulo had mentioned, a broad brown flow with a steady roar. The sound should have been comforting. It wasn't. It drowned everything else, and that meant whatever was behind me could move without being heard. I found a flat area above the bank and set up camp. Hammock, tarp, gear hung high away from the ground. Routine is how you pretend you are safe. As the light faded, I checked the cut on my leg. It had stopped bleeding, but it looked wrong. The edges were slightly darkened, like bruising, and there was a faint, almost sweet smell coming off it. Not rot, not blood, something earthy. I cleaned it again, used antiseptic, wrapped it. I told myself tropical humidity makes everything look worse. That night, I didn't sleep much. Every time I drifted off, something would shift in the undergrowth. I'd sit up, heart hammering, and hear nothing but insects. At around 2 a.m., I heard my name for the first time. It came from across the river, soft, almost casual. "Eli!" I am telling you now, nobody in that forest should have known my name. I lay frozen in my hammock, staring into darkness, and I did not answer. Half a second later, like a delayed reflection, "Eli!" Then silence, then the river, then insects again. I didn't sleep after that. Morning brought no relief, only more light to confirm I was still here. My mouth tasted like old metal. My head felt thick, like I'd been drinking. I checked the cut. The bandage was damp, not just with sweat. When I unwrapped it, the wound looked wider than it had the night before. The skin around it was swollen and a dull, angry red, and there were thin black filaments along the edges. Not hairs, not threads from the bandage. Filaments. They looked like roots trying to stitch themselves into my flesh. I stared until my vision blurred. Then I did what any rational person does when faced with something irrational. I told myself it was lint. I wiped at them with a clean cloth. They didn't come off. They bent slightly under pressure, then sank back into the wound like they were retracting. I gagged. I cleaned it harder, enough that fresh blood surfaced. The filaments disappeared beneath the bleeding. I wrapped it again with shaking hands. I didn't have a fever yet. Or if I did, it hadn't hit me. I packed camp quickly and moved out. The plan was to set 2 more recorders, then follow the river downstream to the extraction point. Within an hour, I realized the river wasn't behaving correctly. It wasn't that it flowed uphill or anything cinematic. It was simpler, and because it was simpler, it was worse. It sounded like it was always on my left. No matter how I moved, I would turn, adjust my route, force the river to be behind me, and 5 minutes later, the sound would be on my left again. It's hard to explain without sounding stupid. But sound in dense canopy is directional. You learn to navigate by it. Here, it was as if the forest was relocating the river in my perception. I checked my compass. The needle swung once, then settled, pointing northwest. I took 10 steps, checked again. Now it pointed east. I held it steady, away from metal. The needle trembled like it was being tugged. I tried to laugh at it and failed. By midday, the heat hit like a physical weight. The humidity made my skin feel constantly wet. Every breath felt like drinking air. I drank more water than usual because my throat felt raw. Still, my tongue dried. That's the thing about dehydration in humidity. You don't realize you're losing fluids because you're sweating constantly. The sweat doesn't evaporate, so your body doesn't get the signal it's overheating until it's too late. At around 1 p.m., I stopped to rest and heard a sound that made my stomach twist. My own footsteps. But I wasn't moving. 3 steps, slow, behind me. I turned sharply, machete already half out. Nothing. No broken leaves, no movement. Then, from ahead of me, a whisper. Not a voice I recognized, just breath-shaping sound. Keep going. Keep going. 2 voices, one slightly delayed, like the forest was practicing. I ran. Not sprinting. Sprinting in jungle gets you injured, but fast, reckless, pushing through brush, ignoring scratches. I didn't stop until my chest burned. When I finally paused, I realized I'd been following a path without deciding to. A faint trail, trampled. Something in me had latched onto it like a drowning person grabbing driftwood. The trail led to a small clearing. In the center was a tree so massive it felt wrong. Its trunk was thick enough to be a building. Its roots rose like walls. Around its base, the insect noise faded. Not stopped, faded. Like the jungle was holding its breath. I took 1 step into the clearing and felt my skin prickle. Then, from somewhere above, my voice again, quiet and intimate, like someone speaking into my ear. Eli. I flinched so hard I almost fell. The sound came again, but not from above, from the tree, from inside it. Eli. The trunk had split, a vertical crack like a mouth, darkness inside. The crack looked too straight, too clean. I backed away slowly. The clearing felt like a threshold. I turned to leave, and I saw something that made me stop. On the edge of the clearing, half hidden behind ferns, there was a strip of bright orange fabric, modern, synthetic, a piece of a shirt or a bag. Someone else had been here. I stepped toward it and saw it was tied to a branch like a marker. Below it, half in the mud, was a boot. Inside the boot, still laced, was a foot. Not a skeleton, not fully decomposed. A human foot, pale and swollen. The skin softened as if it had been soaking for days. The ankle was torn, not cut cleanly, torn, like something had pulled it away from the leg with steady force. I stared at it until my mind refused to accept it. Then the smell hit. Sweet rot, wet decay, something fungal. I stumbled back, hand over my mouth. The jungle noise surged, loud again, as if the clearing had released its breath. Then, behind me, "Don't look." Half a second later, "Don't look." I didn't know if it was warning me or guiding me. Either way, it had my voice now. I ran again, choking on bile. I camped early because my legs were shaking. Not from fear, from the beginning of something physical. My wound burned under the bandage. My skin felt tight. My pulse seemed too loud. I forced myself to eat a protein bar and drink water. Then I checked my leg. The bandage was damp again. This time it smelled stronger. When I peeled it back, I saw that the wound had developed a thin grey film over the surface, like mold. The edges were darker, and the skin around it had a faint marbling, like bruising spreading in unnatural patterns. I cleaned it with antiseptic until it stung sharply. The film came away in soft strands. Underneath, the flesh looked soft. Not raw, soft, like it had been soaked too long. I swallowed hard and wrapped it again. That night, I decided to do something I regret deeply. I turned on my field recorder. Not the ones I'd strapped to trees, but my handheld audio unit. I told myself it was for evidence, for sanity. If I heard something, I'd have it recorded. I clipped it to my hammock strap and hit record. Then I lay there in the dark, listening. The jungle was loud, but now I was listening for patterns. At around 11 p.m., the insect noise dipped again. A silence spread outward like a stain. Then, from somewhere close, a sound like someone exhaling through wet lips. My entire body locked. Then my own voice whispered, "Eli." Half a second later, another voice, not mine, slightly lower, "Eli." Then a third, delayed, distorted, "Eli." It wasn't a chorus. It was a system repeating input. I clamped my hands over my mouth to stop myself from making any sound. Outside my tarp, something moved. Not crashing through brush, not stumbling, moving like it knew exactly where every twig was. It circled the hammock, once, twice, then stopped directly beneath me. The hammock swayed slightly. I could feel it through the straps. Something was touching it. A gentle pressure, like a hand, testing. Then a soft tapping on the underside of the hammock fabric. 3 taps. Pause. 3 taps again. A pattern. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The tapping stopped. For a long time, nothing happened. Then, very softly, like a lullaby, the voice came again. Not mine, not quite human. "It's learning you." Half a second later, in my own voice, "It's learning you." That was the moment the fear changed. Up until then, I'd been afraid of dying. After that, I was afraid of being used. The sounds retreated. The insect noise resumed, almost angrily, like the forest was filling the silence back in. I lay awake until dawn, listening to my own heart and wondering if it was loud enough to be recorded. I expected the morning to bring clarity. Instead, it brought the feeling of being watched so intensely it became a physical sensation on my skin. Every time I looked over my shoulder, I saw nothing, but my body kept reacting as if something was there. I packed quickly and started moving along what I believed was downstream. I tried to stay close to the water, because water is orientation in jungle. If you follow it far enough, it leads to people. But the river kept disappearing. I'd hear it, move toward it, and only find damp earth. I'd find a stream and follow it, and 15 minutes later, it would dead end into a patch of swampy ground thick with roots. It felt like the forest was offering me water, then withdrawing it. My thirst sharpened into something animal. Around noon, I realized my hands were trembling, not from exhaustion, from fever. Heat-induced delirium is subtle at first. You don't suddenly start seeing demons. You start making small mistakes, forgetting what you just did, misplacing objects. I checked my pack and realized my compass was missing. I knew I'd had it 10 minutes earlier. I dumped my pack onto the ground and searched through everything. No compass. Then I saw it, hanging from a vine above my head, swinging gently. My compass! The lanyard twisted around the thin vine like it had been placed there deliberately. I stared at it. I could not remember hanging it. My skin went cold despite the heat. I reached up slowly and took it down. The needle was still, not pointing, just still, like it had died. Then, from somewhere behind me, my voice again, almost amused. "You dropped it." Half a second later, "You dropped it." I turned fast enough to make myself dizzy. Nothing. I tried not to run, but my body wanted to. I kept walking, and the forest kept rearranging. I found my own boot prints in mud ahead of me. That's what broke me, because it meant I'd been here before, but the plants around the prints weren't crushed the way they should be if I'd walked through recently. They looked gently reset, like someone had pressed the mud with a mold. I crouched, staring at the print. Then I noticed something else. Within the print, in the water pulled at the bottom, there was a black shimmer, tiny threads floating like hair. I jerked back. My leg wound throbbed sharply, as if in response. That's when I realized the pain wasn't just pain. It was signaling. I could feel it pulse when certain sounds happened, when the insect noise dipped, when the echoes came. My wound was connected to whatever this was. The jungle wasn't just around me. It had a point of entry. I tried to keep moving, but my thoughts began to slip sideways. I would blink and find myself standing still, staring at a tree trunk, not remembering why I'd stopped. I would think of my apartment, my kitchen, the clean dryness of indoors, and it would feel unreal, like a place from childhood that maybe never existed. By late afternoon, I heard voices that didn't belong, not calling me, talking to each other. A conversation, muffled, like people speaking behind a wall. I moved toward it instinctively, because humans are magnets to each other in isolation. The voices became clearer. It sounded like Paulo and another man I didn't recognize. They were arguing quietly. I pushed through a curtain of vines and found nothing. No one. Just trees. And in the center, a patch of ground where the leaves had been cleared away, exposing dark soil. The soil was covered in small holes, as if something had been inserted and removed repeatedly, like a plug board. I stood there confused and heard Apollo's voice again, right behind me. "Don't answer!" Half a second later, in my own voice. "Don't answer!" I spun and saw, for the first time, something I can't fully explain. Between two trees, there was a shape that didn't belong to the forest. It wasn't a creature in the normal sense. It was a gap. A vertical smear of darkness where the light didn't filter correctly. Like someone had erased a strip of reality and left the outline. The edges shimmered with faint green, like bioluminescent fungus. And inside the darkness, there were pale points that might have been eyes, but they didn't reflect light. They absorbed it. I stood frozen. The gap shifted slightly, like it was leaning. Then, from inside it, the sound of my own breathing played back. My breath, half a second behind. I clapped my hand over my mouth. The gap leaned closer. Then, very softly, from inside it, "Breathe." Half a second later, from the trees around me, "Breathe." It wasn't threatening me, it was instructing me, and that was worse. I ran. Running in jungle is how you die. I knew that, but I ran anyway. I tripped over a root and went down hard. My hands slammed into wet leaf litter. My knee hit something sharp. Pain flared up my leg. I gasped, and immediately regretted it, because the forest repeated the sound back to me from 3 different directions. I scrambled to my feet and kept moving, limping now. I found a thick tree, pressed my back against it, and forced myself to breathe quietly. My knee was bleeding, not badly, but enough. I looked down and saw a shallow slice, probably from a hidden thorn or broken branch. I wiped at it and saw something in the blood. A faint grey string, like mucus. I pinched it between my fingers. It stretched slightly. Then it snapped, and the sensation in my calf wound pulsed sharply, like it had responded. I realized with sudden clarity that the fungus wasn't just in the cut. It was in my body. It was using my injuries as access points. I bandaged my knee quickly, hands shaking. Then I noticed my fingernail, the one I'd used to scratch away the filaments earlier. It was lifting slightly from the nail bed, just a millimeter, but the skin underneath looked pale and softened, as if it had been soaking for days. I pressed it down and felt a sharp sting. A sweet rotten smell rose faintly. I almost vomited. I forced myself to move again, because stopping felt like surrender. By dusk, I reached what looked like a trail. A real trail. Trampled, wider, human-made. Relief hit me so hard I almost cried. I followed it, barely able to think, focused only on putting one foot in front of the other. The trail led to a clearing. In the center was a structure. A hut, maybe? But it wasn't a hut. It was a mass of interwoven vines and branches shaped into something roughly rectangular. Like someone had tried to build shelter but didn't understand architecture. It leaned inward, sagging under its own weight. And it was covered in fungus. Not normal fungus. The same glossy black caps I'd seen on the log, but larger, clustered like boils. The air smelled sweet and rotten. I approached cautiously. The trail continued past it, deeper into the trees. But the hut-like thing felt like a sign, a warning. On one side, something hung from a vine. A backpack, modern, blue. I recognized the brand, a common hiking pack. It looked fresh, but the bottom was damp and stained. I stepped closer and saw why. Below it, half embedded in the mud, was a person. Not a whole person. A torso and head, slumped against a root wall as if someone had sat down and never gotten back up. Their legs were gone, not neatly removed. Gone in a way that suggested they'd been taken by time and moisture, too quickly. The skin on the torso was pale and swollen, as if waterlogged. The face was tilted up toward the canopy, mouth slightly open, eyes half-lidded. Fungal filaments webbed across their lips. One of their eyes had a thin grey bloom over it, like mold. I took a step back, hand over my mouth, and the smell hit fully. It was rot, but not the sharp rot of decay. It was the sweet rot of fruit left too long, a cultivation smell. My stomach turned. I gagged and swallowed hard. Then the person's mouth moved. Not much, just enough. And in a voice that was almost my own, they whispered, "Eli." I stumbled backwards so fast I fell. The corpse's head didn't turn. It didn't animate like a movie. It just spoke. Or something spoke through it. I scrambled up and ran past the structure, down the trail, not caring where it led. Behind me, the jungle went quiet again. Then, softly, like a satisfied echo.
Good.
Half a second later.
Good.
It rained all night. I don't remember setting up camp. I remember collapsing against a tree and waking up under my tarp, somehow hung correctly. I stared at the knots in the rope and couldn't remember tying them. My hands were raw and scratched, but there was no memory of making the shelter. That was when I realized time was breaking, not in a flashy way, in gaps. I would have a thought, blink, and find myself somewhere else. I checked my handheld recorder and saw it was still running from the night before. I listened back with numb fingers, the way you listen to something you already know you won't like. My own breathing, jungle noise, distant taps. Then, at 2:14 a.m., my voice. Not whispering, speaking normally. I can't tell if it's behind me or inside me. I keep thinking about the way the cut looks. It's like it's knitting. I don't remember saying that. Then another voice, low, not mine.
You're doing good.
Then my voice again, quieter, obedient. I'm doing good. Then a long stretch of silence where even the jungle noise dips, like a pause in the recording. Then something that sounded like wet chewing. Then my voice trembling. Stop! Then 3 echoes of stop, stop, stop. Each delayed, each slightly wrong. I slammed the recorder off. My heart hammered. My calf wound throbbed like it had hurt itself. I needed to get out. The trail I'd found had to lead somewhere. People don't make trails that go nowhere. I packed and started moving. The rain made everything slick. Leeches clung to my boots. I tore them off, watching them stretch like rubber and snap free. One attached to my wrist without me noticing. I felt it only when it had already swollen. I pulled it off and saw the tiny triangular bite. It bled longer than it should. The blood looked thin, diluted, and in the thin smear, I saw the faint grey threads again. I wiped them away, but the skin beneath felt numb. Around midday, I heard a helicopter. Real, mechanical, salvation. I froze, head tilted up, listening. It grew louder. I stumbled through brush toward the sound, pushing aside vines, shouting without meaning to. Help! The jungle threw my word back at me instantly.
Help! Help! Help!
The helicopter sound stopped. Not faded, stopped. Like someone had turned it off. The sudden silence hit like a slap. I stood in the rain, mouth open, and realized I'd answered the forest. I'd given it what it wanted, a clear, emotional sound. My wound burned sharply, like punishment. Then, from somewhere else, the helicopter sound resumed, but wrong. It was looping, the same fragment repeating, like audio playback. It wasn't a helicopter, it was mimicry. My hope turned to nausea so fast I almost collapsed. That was when I understood the entity didn't just mimic voices, it mimicked salvation. It had learned the shape of hope, and it used it like bait. The trail began to slope downward. The air smelled different, less sweet rot, more wet stone. I told myself I was approaching a river valley. I kept moving, because stopping felt like being caught. At some point, the insect noise thinned out. Not silence, just less. The jungle felt sparse. The trees grew further apart, and the canopy opened slightly, letting pale light filter down. I saw a tree ahead that looked split down the middle, like it had been struck by lightning. The split formed a vertical hollow, wide enough for a person to crawl into. I didn't want to go near it, but as I approached, I saw something inside. A reflective glint, metal, a satellite phone. My mind snagged on it like a hook. Someone else had been here, and they'd had what I needed. I stepped closer, slow, listening. The air around the hollow was cooler. The smell was strong here, fungus and wet decay. I leaned into the hollow and saw the satellite phone on the ground, half covered in leaf litter. And behind it, deeper in the hollow, something pale. A face. For a second, my brain insisted it was a person crouched inside. Then I realized it wasn't a face. It was the inside of the tree shaped in a way that resembled the face. Knots and fungal growth creating the illusion of eyes and a mouth. Pareidolia. Except when I blinked, the mouth moved slightly, like bark flexing. I jerked back. The satellite phone was still there. I reached in, fingers closing around it. The moment I touched it, my calf wound flared with pain so sharp my vision went white. I screamed. The forest screamed back in my voice. My hand slipped and I dropped the phone. It fell deeper into the hollow, out of reach. Then something moved inside the tree. Not a creature, a shifting of darkness, like the gap I'd seen earlier. It leaned forward, as if to look at me, and the smell intensified. Sweet rot, fungal bloom, wet breath. Then, in Paulo's voice, "Don't!" Half a second later, in my own voice, "Don't!" I stumbled backward, hands up, and my heel caught on a root. I fell hard, landing on my back. My vision swam. When I looked up, I saw the hollow tree was closer than it should be. I could swear it had leaned toward me. The crack looked wider now. The darkness inside seemed thicker. Then I heard it, the sound of many small things moving at once. Not insects, not leaves. A soft synchronized shifting like 1,000 threads tightening. My leg wound throbbed in time with it. It was communicating through my body. I scrambled to my feet and ran again, limping badly. Behind me, I heard a whisper that wasn't a voice exactly, more like the forest shaping air into meaning.
It's inside now.
Half a second later, in my own voice. It's inside now. I don't remember how I got out. That's the part that keeps me up at night. I remember rain. I remember collapsing. I remember a bright white light. Not sun, but a flashlight. Voices. Human voices. Real. Hands lifting me. I remember trying to speak, and my mouth producing something that wasn't English. Something wet and slurred. I remember one of the rescuers swearing, saying my leg looked wrong. Then there are gaps. Then I'm in a hospital. Fluorescent lights, clean sheets, dry air that felt like knives in my lungs. The nurse asked me my name, and I said it correctly. Then she asked where I'd been, and I opened my mouth and froze, because for a second, the answer wasn't the jungle. It was something else, like a file path, like a category. I remember her face tightening when she saw my leg. The doctor came in and unwrapped it. I didn't look at first. Then I did, because you always do. The wound had expanded into an oval patch of deadened skin about the size of my hand. The flesh was pale and softened, and under the surface, you could see faint branching grey lines like a root network. The doctor pressed gently around it, and the skin depressed like a wet sponge. A thin grey fluid seeped out. It smelled sweet. The doctor didn't say infection. He said quietly,
What is that?
They took samples. They asked me about exposure. They asked about fungi. They asked about bites. I told them about the black mushrooms. I didn't tell them about the echoes, because how could you explain that without losing control of the narrative? They gave me antibiotics. They cleaned the wound. They talked about debridement. Then, 2 nights later, I woke up to a sound in my hospital room. A soft tapping under my bed. 3 taps. Pause. 3 taps. The same pattern from the hammock. I held my breath. The tapping stopped. Then, from a corner of the room, my own voice, whispering.
Okay.
Half a second later,
Okay.
I sat up so fast my IV line tugged. The room was empty. No one. Just the dim light, the hum of air conditioning. But the smell, the sweet rot smell, was in my room. Not strong, but present, like the jungle had breathed into the hospital. I pressed the call button. A nurse came. She asked what was wrong. I almost told her. Instead, I asked for water. She handed me a plastic cup. As I drank, I noticed something in the cup. Tiny grey threads floating in the water. I blinked hard, and they were gone. The nurse watched me for a long moment, and then left. When the door shut, I heard my name, soft, from inside my own throat, not spoken, felt, like a vibration. I put my hand to my neck and swallowed. My calf wound pulsed in answer. They discharged me after a week. They told me the infection was unusual, but responding. They scheduled follow-ups. They recommended therapy. They told me I was lucky. I went home. My apartment smelled wrong. Not rot, just damp. Like wet soil left inside too long. I opened the windows, I cleaned. I told myself it was psychological. The first night back, I slept in my bed, exhausted. At 2:14 a.m., I woke up, not from a noise, from silence. My room felt muted, like the sound had been absorbed. Then, from the hallway, a soft rustle. Not footsteps, not someone walking. Something brushing against walls, like leaves. I sat up, heart hammering. The rustle moved past my bedroom door, then stopped. Then I heard breathing. But it didn't match my breathing. It was half a second behind. I clamped my hand over my mouth. The breathing continued anyway, because it wasn't mine anymore. Then, very softly, from the other side of my bedroom door, in a voice that sounded like my own but too smooth.
Keep going.
Half a second later, from deeper in the apartment, another voice, lower.
Keep going.
I didn't move. I didn't answer. I stayed perfectly still until dawn. When morning came, the apartment looked normal. But the plants on my windowsill, the ones I'd kept half alive for years, were greener. Not healthier. Greener in a way that looked aggressive. The soil was damp, even though I hadn't watered them. When I lifted one pot, I saw pale fuzz under the rim. Fungal bloom. I threw the pot in the trash. 2 days later, the trash smelled sweet. I took it out. When I came back in, I noticed something on my kitchen counter. A small smudge of dark residue, like soot. I wiped it away. It smeared. And for a second, I could have sworn it shifted under the cloth, like ink dispersing. I stared. It stopped. That night, I checked my leg. The wound had healed over, mostly, but the skin was discolored, and the branching grey lines beneath were still faintly visible, like roots under thin soil. Sometimes, when the apartment was quiet, I felt my leg pulse. Not like pain, like a signal, like a response to something I couldn't hear. I tried to tell myself it was nerve damage. Then I made the mistake of listening to my field recordings. I had retrieved the 2 recorders I'd managed to set before everything went wrong. The rescue team found them based on GPS tags. I told myself I needed closure, evidence, proof I wasn't insane. I plugged the hard drive into my computer and put on headphones. Site 1. Normal jungle noise at first. Birds, insects. Then my own voice, recorded from the initial test. Site 1. 10:43. Half a second later, through the mic, faint but clear. 10:43. Then silence dips, like the jungle noise is being pulled down. Then a whisper, not mine.
It's learning you.
At 2:14 a.m., the exact time I'd woken in the hospital, the exact time I'd woken in my apartment, the recording changed. The jungle ambience stopped, like someone hit mute. Then a sound like wet chewing. Then my voice, whispering something I do not remember saying.
I can't tell if I left.
Then another voice, lower.
You didn't.
Half a second later, my own voice repeats.
You didn't.
I ripped the headphones off and sat there shaking, staring at my screen. My apartment was silent. Then from somewhere behind me, not from speakers, not from the computer, my own voice whispered, "Okay." Half a second later, "Okay." I didn't turn around. I stared forward, very still, because something in me understood the rule now. If you acknowledge it, it becomes more precise. The silence behind me thickened. And in that silence, I felt it. Not as a monster in a room, but as a presence in a system. Like the jungle was not a place. Like it was a network. Like it had mapped me, catalogued me, inserted itself into me as a node. I sat there until my eyes burned. When I finally moved, my leg pulsed gently. Not pain, not warning, more like satisfaction. Like something inside me had heard the recording too. Like it recognized itself. And then, because my brain is still trying to make sense of it, it offered me one last small kindness. A memory of Paulo, his warning. You record voices. Forest, record you. I didn't understand back then. I understand now. Because sometimes when I'm alone in my apartment and I clear my throat, I hear it again, half a second later, from somewhere behind my left shoulder. Perfect, patient, learning. And the echo isn't the worst part. The worst part is what comes after it, when the echo pauses, like it's waiting for me to answer back. And some nights, when I'm half asleep, I feel my mouth move without permission, shaping a whisper I don't choose. Not my name, not help, just a small, calm word, like compliance.
Good.
Half a second later, from somewhere inside the walls.
Good.
And if you're reading this, if you've made it all the way to the end, listen carefully, not to me, to the quiet right after this, to the gap in your room where sound doesn't behave correctly. Because the canopy doesn't echo like that, and neither should your house.